All right, my name is Brian Bumpas. Can you hear me all right? Okay, good. I am a China SME and manager at 26 Technologies, and I'm here to talk about identifying, quantifying, and deciphering leaks in the PRC information environment. I'm going to take a relatively expansive definition of leaks, and you'll see why in just a second. But I'm really looking forward to today's conversation and learning from you all and sharing the work that we're doing here at the 26 Information Advantage Division. So a lot of time, money, and energy goes into understanding this one individual. Anybody know who this is? And I don't think it's an understatement to say that understanding Xi Jinping and top-level CCP leadership is seemingly a black box. It's a difficult to penetrate enigma. Meanwhile, strict censorship and information controls prevent a thorough understanding of how the Chinese public perceives or identifies or analyzes any given situation. Because of this, there's a cottage industry that is developed into, quote unquote, reading the tea leaves just to understand what the PRC is doing in the world. A quick Google search leading into this talk led to, anyone want to guess how many results I got? A number. 2. 199,000 results looking for reading the tea leaves in Xi Jinping's China. These are real headlines that illustrate both the breadth and the range of quality in analyzing Xi Jinping's China and reading those tea leaves. My favorite here is Xi Jinping and his 2 cups of tea. But I'm here to make the case that if you want to understand the PRC is the best way to do that. The PRC itself. The PRC provides a roadmap for understanding what it is seeking to do in the world. I'm certainly not here to make the case that understanding China is easy or that I know everything that there is to know about China. It's a country of 1.4 billion people, with complex bureaucratic entities with overlapping and at times conflicting interests. But the way that the governance of the country is structured creates 4 types of leaks that help us find the way and find that roadmap to understanding what the PRC is seeking to do. Some of these are ones that you are likely already tracking. Others are more counterintuitive, and I'm going to posit to this crowd, do qualify as leaks. But if you combine them all into one comprehensive and data-backed assessment of what the PRC is doing, it not only helps you understand PRC intentions, it also helps you understand how the Chinese public is perceiving the world around them. We'll get into examples of each of these and define them. But for now, I'll just say that they're grounded in one fundamental hypothesis, which is that if you want to understand what China is seeking to do in the world, you need to know not just what they're saying, but what they're seeking to hide. This is a problem that we tackle at 26, where we provide a range of solutions to hard-to-crack national security challenges. I'm in the 4th quadrant over here, Information Operations or Information Advantage Division, where we collect and analyze OSINT data to decipher great power intentions. My training is in China, so that's where I'll focus my talks today. I am language enabled and have time and country in both China and Taiwan. But just know that we are also analyzing great power messaging and strategic communications for Russia and other great powers as well. So if that's of interest to your team, let me know and I can put you in touch. So let's dive right in. What are the 4 types of leaks that you need to know about if you want to understand what the PRC is doing in the world? The first one is ground truth. Believe it or not, the PRC does divulge information, both openly and inadvertently. It's a big country, massive country with 97 million party members that are charged with governing 31 provinces, 299 prefectural level cities, and 1,300 counties all across the nation. It's a massive governing structure that requires a lot of people. And whenever you have a lot of people, you need to communicate to those people to ensure you're all rowing in one direction. To quote one of my favorite China analysts, Peter Mattis, who wrote in Foreign Affairs, quote, "This sprawling structure means that no matter how centralized decision-making is, most of China's policy objectives and guidance must be communicated openly, creating a call and response dynamic that well-positioned analysts can freely observe." Put differently, directives are issued from the top, emanate out throughout the nation, and the party collects feedback through its sprawling apparatus to include censorship. Censorship is a signal for use of governance. And that feedback helps the PRC and the CCP anticipate problems and mitigate unintended consequences of national policy. Shaping and controlling these narratives as it does so requires massive investments. And that's both from a financial perspective and a personnel perspective. On the financial end, a State Department estimate puts it at $10 billion that the PRC invests to control and shape narratives both in and outside of China. From the personnel perspective, there are at least 10, and I expect this is a lower end estimate, at least tens of thousands of censors who are charged with implementing and interpreting the directives that come from above to prevent sensitive information from proliferating online. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of government social media accounts or PRC-affiliated social media accounts amplify and produce messaging. And the PRC employs vast networks of inauthentic accounts to create the appearance of grassroots support for its messaging. One estimate from 2017 puts the volume of content that they produce at hundreds of millions of posts in any given year. But again, this is 2017. We can only expect that it's grown since then. All of this means that you don't need leaks necessarily to understand what the PRC is seeking to do. A lot of information is communicated openly, and we can seize and exploit on that information. But also, whenever you have so many people, you have leaks that enable a peek behind the curtain. Anyone know who this is? This is Li Keqiang, Chinese premier, and at the time, Xi Jinping's second in command. He died of a sudden heart attack in October 2023, prompting a wave of grief throughout the country. How do you think the PRC responded? Thoughts and prayers, love it. Anyone else? I'm sorry? Oh, I love that response. Basically, by censoring, of course, and there's actually a euphemism. If you are censored and getting punished by the local police, we're gonna have some tea. So this man, Xi Jinping's second in command, dies, and what does the PRC do? They issue censorship directives. What you're seeing here is a real leaked censorship directive, which we translated into English through China Digital Times. It's telling censors and state media how to respond to this situation. In this case, I didn't think about how I'd read this. In this case, it's saying exclusively use copy from central media outlets. In other words, use the language that comes from above, do not deviate. And it's telling censors in this second paragraph to heavily monitor comment sections and to remove overly effusive comments. If he's a number 2 individual in CCP governance, why would you remove overly effusive comments? You would think that support for PRC officials is something that they would want. I'll get to that point in just a second. But also, what just happened? Yeah, exactly, right? Oh no, come on. Most importantly is this third paragraph. Communicate any upcoming commercial events or activities to relevant departments because they might need to be temporarily suspended. Why? Why do you think? Maybe it wasn't really a heart attack. I agree, that is certainly a hypothesis. I don't know for sure. Any other guesses? No disruptions to the government. The other thing that I would say is, this seems to be a case of Icarus flying too close to the sun, right? He is the number 2 official, and the death of a party official, Hu Yaobang, in April 1989, led to a weeks-long national protest that culminated in what we now know as the Tiananmen Massacre. This guy, Hu Yaobang, the guy from 1989, like Li Keqiang, the guy from 2023, was a reformer who advocated for more liberal policies within China, both foreign and domestic policy. In Xi Jinping's China, this guy on the right, Li Keqiang, was about as close as it gets to being one of those reformers, known for his pragmatic position on economic policy, advocating for relatively open and robust private sector. So what the leak directive showed is that the PRC viewed this as a potential collective action event. If Li Keqiang, the symbol of economic reform, passed away and we're seeing so much support for him, that is an implicit criticism of Xi Jinping and his regime. This is a consistent theme in censorship in which the core through line, if you will, and driver behind most censorship is to prevent collective action and protests. Now, this is great. Ground truth is great. Leaks are excellent. But the problem with ground truth is that it only comes out every once in a while, meaning that you cannot necessarily rely on it to understand the party's response to any given situation in the day-to-day. That is where data exhaust comes into play. Applied to censorship, data exhaust is the idea that the very absence of a signal can create a signal in and of itself by drawing attention to something the PRC is seeking to hide. Phrased differently, the PRC reveals or leaks, if you will, its intentions by silencing information. In a nutshell, once you collect enough ground truth and data related to those censorship directives, you can put it into context and you know what it looks like when a censorship directive is issued. And once you do this enough times, you can use quantitative methods to reverse engineer the PRC priorities in the day-to-day. That's exactly what we do on the M3 team at 2.6, where we build on the work of our academic advisors who are listed here, Dr. Gary King, Jen Pan, and Molly Roberts, whose work found that, again, more than anything else, PRC censorship is used to prevent the emergence of collective action, not so much to prevent political criticism, but to prevent the emergence of protests. And in furtherance of those goals, the PRC uses vast networks of inauthentic pro-PRC accounts to strategically distract from sensitive events and flood the information environment. We took those papers and the academic literature and operationalized them into what we now call M3, building a system to reverse engineer PRC priorities, a data-backed way to read the tea leaves, if you will. So we collect data at scale, we run it through a set of AI and ML tools to identify what we call manipulation events, and then put subject matter experts at the other end of the line to put that data into context. What does a censorship event or a series of censorship events mean for what the PRC is seeking to achieve? Again, this is based on the idea that we can strengthen our understanding of the PRC by evaluating not just what it is seeking, what it is saying, but what it is seeking to hide. We've been tracking manipulation since 2018. In one of our earliest examples listed here, this is a case of discussion related to Xi Jinping in 2017 and 2018. And what you see in the light pink is daily discussion of posts related to his name, live posts, uncensored posts. Dark red ones are ones that first went live and were subsequently censored. And you see heavy censorship leading up to this period of a term limits announcement. several weeks later, and a sharp decline as automated censorship techniques were used to control discussion of his name. So what was that term limits announcement? It was an announcement that they would abolish term limits and essentially give Xi Jinping the latitude to hold his grip on power. Now, to be clear, at the time, we did not predict that the PRC was going to abolish term limits. Prediction is hard, you all know this. And our system was still new, and we were still seeking to understand how we can interpret the signals that we collected. But this system has been in place for many years now, and in one of the largest censorship events that we've ever detected, our team of China analysts, myself included, was monitoring in real time. This is a picture of Dr. Li Wenliang. He was one of the first whistleblowers to say that something serious was emerging in Wuhan, specifically saying that a SARS-like virus was infecting and appearing in local emergency rooms, urging fellow doctors to be on the lookout. About 2 months after giving that warning, he contracted the virus and died, and his death led to an outpouring of grief, criticism of the government, and calls for free speech in China. At that time, as this was breaking, our team assessed that the PRC was allowing most of this discussion to remain live while silencing the most subversive threads that called for free speech or democracy and deflecting blame to local officials. This was based on analysis of trends in the data at that time. This chart, like the one before, depicts post volumes on a popular social media platform, with the light blue indicating uncensored posts and the dark blue indicating censored posts or posts that were removed after being published online. And then the pink is messaging from state media or official PRC accounts. And what you see is several stages of censorship, first defined by very heavy initial censorship as they sought to kind of find a narrative that would resonate, and then declining censorship as they found one that did. And that narrative was deflecting blame on local officials, pulling blame away from the central government, and referring to Li as a martyr for the people. Now, looking in aggregate, despite this being one of the largest censorship events that we have ever detected, overall censorship rates hovered at just around 10 to 11%. I'll come back to this point later on, but for now, as a recap, our assessment at that time was the CCP was allowing most discussion, silencing the most subversive threads, and deflecting blame to local officials. These conclusions were later confirmed by another leaked censorship directive, which, similar to the one before, talks about rigidly adhering to standard sources, so state media, central state media, controlling the temperature. This is a euphemism for removing content at the extremes, and ultimately preventing any sensational responses to Li's death. So since then, we built on these lessons to continue tracking PRC priorities in the day-to-day. We analyze more than 1,600 manipulation events in China every year, and hundreds more tied to PRC efforts to shape international narratives. And what we found is that seizing on this data exhaust requires two things: the data itself and qualitative expertise to put that in context. One particularly useful type of data exhaust is bureaucratic missteps. These are mistakes in the formulation of messaging or policy that can shed light on true policy intentions. But it's all grounded in one simple concept: the PRC makes mistakes. Even with that vast scale of the manipulation apparatus, $10 billion, the PRC cannot always control the narrative or anticipate how the public will respond to the narratives that it pushes out. When these mistakes occur, the PRC uses its censorship toolbox to cover up. Sometimes these mistakes occur at the individual level. This instance is one in which a PRC diplomat, the ambassador to France, Liu Xiaoye, expressed support for Moscow and called the sovereignty of post-Soviet nations into question. No surprise, this caused a diplomatic row in Europe, forcing Beijing to respond and the foreign ministry to disavow his remarks as, quote, personal comments and reassert its position of sovereignty, support for sovereignty of European nations. That is despite the fact that really he was reflecting Xi Jinping's support for Moscow, but he deviated from the official party line. So we often think of the PRC as being aggressive and hawkish in its messaging and stance on foreign policy, which is certainly true, but it doesn't tell the whole story. The PRC is also a highly risk-averse bureaucracy. Aggressive bureaucrats like this guy, Liu, or the eponymous wolf warrior, Zhao Lijian, might get credit for disseminating nationalist rhetoric abroad when they speak back to their nationalistic audiences at home, but they also end up getting punished from experimenting too much or causing diplomatic scandals abroad. So sometimes those mistakes are at the individual level. Sometimes the mistakes occur at the very implementation of policy or formulation of policy. Just a few weeks ago, the PRC announced a pilot policy for issuing new national digital IDs, one digital ID to rule them all, on the pretense that if you give your information to the government, you don't need to give it to social media companies. So they're saying this is under the banner of increasing online privacy. But when it was announced, this pilot policy, it prompted another wave of public pushback as Chinese legal experts asserted that it jeopardized privacy and netizens criticized it as being overly excessive. Overall, our SMEs assess that the PRC's response to this situation, little to no amplification, followed by heavy censorship against pushback, casts doubt on the longevity of the future of this program. So some mistakes occur at the individual level, others occur at the formulation of policy, and still others occur at the very act of deciding to censor. Sometimes censoring can lead and draw more attention to the very subject or platforms that the PRC is seeking to hide. This is a well-researched dynamic in censorship called the Streisand effect. For example, this one paper here from 2018 found that a sudden ban of Instagram, which Chinese netizens used and loved during the Hong Kong protests in 2014, led to an increase in use of VPNs. And because they were looking to get access again to Instagram, that brought them to other more sensitive sites that talked about the protests and gave them access to sensitive information through what's known as a gateway effect. But the PRC knows this and has evolved a sophisticated playbook to manage events as they grow in sensitivity. We see this also in their response to that Li Wenliang incident. And if you remember how the event was only censored at 10 to 11%, despite it being one of the largest censorship events that we detected, this was an example of the PRC seeking to avoid that censorship Streisand effect, trying to prevent the act of censorship drawing more attention to it. You can see that here where they're talking about control the narrative, allowing control the temperature, allowing most discussion to stay live, but just removing those posts at the extreme. So censorship can actually lead to more access to banned information and VPN acquisition, which leads to my next and final type of leak, wall climbers. These are Chinese netizens who use VPNs or other censorship evasion tools to access content from international platforms. They leak information into and out of the tightly controlled Chinese information environment. In this example from April, an altercation between the Taiwanese Coast Guard and a Chinese fishing vessel led to the deaths of 2 Chinese fishermen. News of this was shared in these pictures by the Taiwanese Coast Guard on banned social media platforms, or rather, social media platforms that were banned in China. But wall climbers then took news of that incident and brought it over to Weibo, where it subsequently prompted outrage, including this quote here: "Even enemies cannot be this cold-blooded. Why did the Taiwanese Coast Guard kill these 2 people?" But because of that nationalist pushback, it actually sparked censorship in China because netizens were calling for more action from Beijing, urging them to respond with stronger force against Taiwan. and they perceived the CCP's response as being weak. So this also shows how the Chinese public's and even the CCP's response often isn't what we might assume it will be. It's not, the censorship wasn't tied to calling for more support for Taiwanese democracy so much as calling for more action against Taiwan. Overall, what we found is that Beijing walks a tightrope on Taiwan, moderating calls for action, even as it hints at reunification by force. But going back to wall climbers, this is not just some rare occurrence. Information from sensitive sources often breaks through. One study found that approximately 1/4 of viral content relevant to China on Twitter makes its way to Weibo. And most of this is antagonistic towards the Chinese government or people. And when wall climbers bring content in, it's usually more effective. For example, when netizens share content from banned US sources, it gains 16 times as much engagement as similar content from the US Embassy. And believe it or not, state media themselves assist in that process by bringing in what they perceive as hawkish US rhetoric. It helps reinforce that the West is seeking to contain China. But wall climbers also bring information out of China. This screenshot depicts a group of dissidents called the Great Translation Movement who took information from China and translated it for foreign audiences in an effort to bring light to PRC propaganda. This screenshot on the right depicts a campaign in which the PRC was warning against friendly foreigners, AKA Westerners, as a counterintelligence threat. This group on the left took this campaign, translated it to English, and showed how it was both hypocritical and exposed contradictions in PRC policy. This campaign quickly gained a following of hundreds of thousands of people, whereas most PRC posts are lucky to get a couple dozen likes. For example, the PRC mobilized a campaign of hundreds of inauthentic posts to discredit this account. None of them got any significant engagement. So despite all the effort that Beijing expends to control the flow of information, data flows in and out of the censorship apparatus, and these leaks help ground our understanding of both PRC policies and how the Chinese public is responding. So to recap, this sprawling structure of PRC governance helps us understand what PRC policies are. Oh, I gotta look at this. To understand PRC priorities, you need to look not just at what Beijing is saying, but what it's seeking to hide. And then these 4 types of data leaks can give you a data-backed understanding of how the PRC is responding to given situations and help you quantify trends and perspectives. And when that doesn't enable you to do so effectively, netizens themselves help you guide the way. And leveraging these leaks requires both data, knowing where to look, and qualitative expertise. With that, thank you all. I'm looking forward to your questions. The question was, where do these leaked directives come from? Most of them come from this source here, China Digital Times. They've got insiders who help them kind of take the leaks. Again, like this is a big enterprise and there's a lot of people involved in it. A lot of them aren't paid very well. And also many of them don't agree with the censorship that's being enacted. So they provide these leaks to entities like the China Digital Times, which help give us that peek behind the curtain. Thank you for the question. Other questions?
Are you seeing anything coming up related to the pending U.S. election?
By anything, do you mean what?
Coming out of China looking to influence someone.
Do we see Chinese attempts to influence? So certainly we do see coordinated campaigns on US social media to influence the elections. It's not at the scale or effectiveness of Russian campaigns overall. The the PRC is there and is actively engaging in seeking to shape narratives, but it's not as effective. Its tactics are not as effective as those of Russia. Thank you for the question. Yes?
How is 2.6 without giving up proprietary information? How do you guys collect at scale the information from Weibo and kind of what other platforms are you collecting?
Yeah, what I can say, I definitely can't get into too many details because of what you hit at, but what I can say is that we collect based on users rather than keywords. So we find users who talk about the things that matter to our customers. And then because, right, social media is dynamic. If you're collecting on keywords, what I think is sensitive today will change tomorrow. And also the very nature of censorship means if it is sensitive today, then it's not going to be discussed tomorrow. So instead of doing that, we find users who talk about the things that matter to our customers and collect data from them. Yes?
Was the previous question meant to be, are these open platforms that you can see without a, yeah, okay.
I see. I'm sorry. I missed that part. The question was, are these open platforms that we are collecting from? Yes, we do not hack. We are not hacking into anything.
Because like you were saying that the US data is like amplified more.
Engaged with more. So this visualization on the left shows that content coming from the US embassy, the Ukrainian embassy, or the Russian embassy, most of this was tied to discussion of Ukraine at the time. This is shortly after the invasion. Content that came from actual netizens who brought US sources, or Russian sources even, into the Chinese information environment got more engagement than quote unquote official sources like the US embassy. Thank you. Is that my time? I'm happy to answer more, but all right. Thank you all.